Now, Turkey is observing a period of mourning for the victims of two suicide bombings in Ankara. Thousands of people have gathered in the Turkish capital for a commemoration ceremony. 95 people were killed in the blasts at a peace rally near the main train station on Saturday. Around 250 others were injured. Live pictures from Ankara now show that the HDP leader, Selahattin Demirtas, is addressing the crowds there. Let's go to Bernard Smith, who's live for us in Istanbul. And Bernard, not surprisingly, a huge outpouring of grief. We've been in Turkey now in 3 days of mourning. Still, though, no claims of responsibility.
No, surely no claim of responsibility. And Selahattin Demirtas, who you see there speaking at that rally to commemorate the victims, he's just said he believes 128 people were killed by what were thought to be two suicide bomb attacks. The official figure remains 95, with another 48 people seriously injured. The government on Saturday, Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu, suggested there were two possible parties that could have been responsible for this, either the outlawed PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or ISIL. I should say, though, that a couple of days ago, the PKK had trailed an announcement that it was going to have a unilateral ceasefire in the run-up to the election. That announcement was due to be officially made today, Sunday, but they made it on Saturday after that bomb attack. So perhaps a bit more focus on ISIL. Turkey's EU Affairs Minister, she was on domestic television earlier this morning, Beryl Dedeoğlu, suggesting that initial investigations said planning for this attack had come from outside the country. Shuli.
Yeah, I imagine it's very tense right now, Bernard, and of course there are going to be parliamentary elections on November the 1st. Presumably security is now going to be very much the focus for political parties.
Yeah, security has been a concern in the last couple of months, and of course now emphasised after Saturday's attack. In the June election, most of the focus of the campaigning was on the economy. Turkey's economy has been struggling, unemployment crept up a little bit, the Turkish currency has lost a lot of its value against the dollar, but because of increased instability after the June 7th election, when there was no overall winner and nobody was able to form a coalition, the PKK increased its attacks, the government increased its crackdown on the PKK here and in Turkey and in northern Iraq. There have been another suicide bombing in Suruç a couple of months ago. Now this one, yes, security is now the main focus of concern, and I can imagine in the weeks running up to the November 1st election, security will be at the forefront of the campaigning for this second round, this second attempt to have an election in Turkey, Shuli.
Bernard, thank you for that. Bernard Smith there in Istanbul. Well, world leaders have condemned the bombings in Turkey. US President Barack Obama offered his condolences, saying the American people stand in solidarity with the people of Turkey. Russian President Vladimir Putin has called the attacks an act of terrorism.
I want to express my deep condolences to the Turkish people and the Turkish president. What happened is an act of terrorism. And surely this is an attempt to destabilize our neighboring and friendly country. All the more so, it was committed in the course of an election campaign. It's an obvious provocation.
Murat Somer is a political science professor at KOCH University in Istanbul. He blames the government for what he calls increased lawlessness across Turkey.
What needs to be expressed here is who has political responsibility. And it is clear that the government has primary political responsibility for first failing to protect the right to live of all its citizens as it should, indiscriminately, and second for failing for contributing to an atmosphere of polarization and oppression and lawlessness. In fact, the Justice and Development Party, the government, and President Erdogan regularly conduct rallies that are of much bigger scale than the one yesterday in Ankara.
Now, there have been large gatherings across Turkey as the country begins 3 days of national mourning for the 95 people who died in a deadly attack on Ankara on Saturday. But among the tears, there are messages of anger for the Turkish government, as Mohammed Jamjoom now explains.
With emotions as raw as the day was sad, the mourners raged and cried in equal measure. Mothers and aunts, unable to believe and unwilling to accept their loved ones were gone. About to bury the bodies of those activists who were attacked even as they called for peace. The day after, people here in Ankara are still stunned. Thousands gathered. Leftists, unionists, and pro-Kurdish activists made up most of the crowd, with placards to protest and carnations to commemorate. Sinan Osaygün lost one of his best friends in the bombings. At first, he could barely express himself.
I just don't know what to say. I have no words.
But then he, like so many others, began to question why this happened.
How can anyone carry out this kind of massacre? We advocate peace. Who exactly fears peace? If anyone should fear anything, it should be war, not peace.
Some are frustrated with the government. Frustration that could be heard in chants accusing President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of having made the country less safe, especially for members of its Kurdish population. Many at this rally here are venting their anger. Many more are overwhelmed with grief, still shocked at the attacks that happened and fearful that more could happen in the weeks to come. But dread, they say, won't stop their demand for peace.
I am afraid, but one thing we know, the more we fear, the situation worsens in this country. Today, we have to fight if we want to leave a better future for the next generation.
With parliamentary elections just around the corner and a continuing conflict with the Kurdish armed group PKK, more and more say it's unity that's needed, even as political divisions seem to grow deeper every day.
Well, Mohammed Jamjoom is live for us, standing by in Ankara. So, Mohammed, you were mentioning in your report it's unity that's needed, but actually plenty of anger against the government, which is continuing. And I've heard that there's clashes, or have been a short time ago, in Diyarbakir. What more can you tell us about those?
Yeah, that's right, Barbara. Just earlier this evening in Diyarbakir, a predominantly Kurdish city in the southeastern part of the country, you had thousands of protesters that came out chanting anti-government slogans, very upset about what happened yesterday. Now, it's nothing new that there are protests in a city like Diyarbakir. Oftentimes there are protests. Even yesterday there were protests, but the crowds seem to be growing bigger. You had police and security forces deploying their water cannons. You had clashes with security forces there. Anger seems to be rising. Volatility is rising, especially in that region in the southeastern part of Turkey, because the Kurdish minority in the country is feeling aggrieved. We even heard today in Ankara, as you saw in our report a few moments ago, members of the Kurdish community feel that the government hasn't done enough to protect them. That is why you are hearing more and more anti-government rhetoric. That's why you're hearing more anger directed at Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. They say that consistently he has not done enough for the security forces here to protect the Kurdish community, and they blame AKP and the Prime Minister Davutoglu and the President for security lapses that allow these attacks that have targeted rallies in which there are pro-Kurdish activists. It wasn't just the rally yesterday that was targeted. That's the third such rally since June in which pro-Kurdish activists have been targeted. In July, in Suruc, on the border with Syria, in Turkey, you had a rally that was targeted in which dozens of people were killed, many of them pro-Kurdish activists. So this anger is rising at a time when elections are right around the corner, and it really doesn't bode well, a lot of people here say, for the security situation in Turkey in the months to come. Barbara?
And Mohammed, just briefly about those elections. I mean, how difficult is it going to be to hold elections, considering what you just mentioned, all those protests and the anger in the country?
Well, it looks as though the elections will go on as planned, but the fact of the matter is the government here is continually calling for unity. They're calling for people to rally behind them and rally behind, the government here in the country. But there are more political divisions. Anger is rising, and right now this country is really fraught with the kind of tension that it hasn't seen here in a very long time. You have Turkey ensnared in multiple conflicts right now. Not only are they taking part in attacks against ISIL, they're also taking part in aerial bombardments against the PKK, the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, which the Turkish government considers a terrorist organization. Because of that, many people here in Turkey are upset with the government. They feel that the Turkish government has really bitten off more than it can chew security-wise, and they're worried that the security situation here will continue to deteriorate. So taking all of that together, even though it looks as though the elections will go forward as planned, really it's anyone's guess as to what will happen on the election day, and there's going to be a lot of second guessing about what the government is doing in the weeks to go before the election here. Barbara?
Mohammed Jamjoom with the latest from Ankara. Mohammed, thank you.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.